How's it going, folks? Welcome back to the No Huddle Show podcast. I'm your host, Eagles beat reporter Mike Kaye. I'm joined by my fellow NJ Advanced Media beat writer, Chris Franklin. Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Mike. We're getting very close, 10 days now, going to the start of the NFL season. I mean, who would have thought this time would actually fly by? So the fact that we're actually are ready to talk about week one against Washington now is really crazy how fast this time is going by, but it's really exciting as well too to get back to some normalcy.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about this whole season is obviously we're dealing with a lot going on in our country. We're dealing with a lot going on in our lives. We're dealing with a lot going on in football. So it's kind of a cluster of everything, and it's made for a unique situation. This is my sixth NFL season as an NFL beat writer. I know this is your first year covering the Eagles as a full-time beat writer. I know you've kind of dealt with a lot of college coverage of training camps and stuff. But what did you take away from this year's training camp this summer, your first time covering the Eagles as a full-time beat writer?
I think one of the biggest takeaways I saw was how many times the players were not in pads and not really, or just going out thud or just taking it easy. I mean, given the current situation for the Eagles, that may be a really good thing when it comes to injuries. But I think the overall, I don't want to say intensity, but overall physicality of these training camps compared to what you see maybe in college where you have guys going all out every time trying to impress coaches and trying to make it from fourth team to third team or fourth to second or that jump. I think the physicality has been, or lack thereof, has been one of the biggest eye-opening things I've seen compared to the two.
Well, and that physicality hasn't really necessarily amounted to an injury-free training camp. It's almost become a sad joke on social media that really the Eagles have been just hit with a mash unit of injuries. And, as we look into them, let's kind of go over what the latest is. So Avonte Maddox, the number 2 starting corner, is listed as day-to-day with a lower body injury. So is defensive tackle Hassan Ridgeway with a lower body injury, also day-to-day. Those are two guys that shouldn't be worried about for week one. It's just, another set of ailments. Then you look at, Carson Wentz. From everything we've been told, they are not concerned about his injury status. They're kind of giving him a week 4 of the preseason-like treatment so they can get more looks at Nate Sudfeld and Jalen Hurts, but also let him kind of relax and kind of, get ready for the season because he's going to have to carry this team for 16 weeks or longer. Javon Hargrave has been out of practice pretty regularly, even though he hasn't really performed. He's still dealing with his pec injury. Miles Sanders has been out there with his lower body injury from everything we've been told about him. Not really concerned about week one, but, there could be some rust that he needs to knock off during the week. Jalen Reagor and Quez Watkins, both rookie wide receivers, are dealing with their own upper body injuries. Reagor is likely to miss 1 to 2 weeks. We covered that on our last podcast, or 1 to 2 weeks of the season. And then Quez Watkins returned to practice earlier this week, then was sidelined again on Wednesday. I don't know really what's going on there. Maybe he's a candidate to be put on injured reserve to save that roster spot. You give him kind of an injury redshirt year. And then, where they're really banged up is a defensive end with Derek Barnett, Vinny Curry, and Jannard Avery, who we really haven't seen much of at practice. I think that's kind of a concern too. When we look at like where this Eagles team is, I just kind of wonder how prepared they will be from a depth standpoint. And I think that segues into what we wanted to talk about throughout this podcast. This, for those who are new listeners who haven't been listening to us since, a few years ago when Zach and I used to do this, or before that when Elliot and Zach or Matt and Elliot, we've obviously had a lot of show hosts as guys have gone elsewhere in their career or gone to cover the Giants or whatever. But this is basically the show where we spend the entire show breaking down the 53-man roster and projecting the 53-man roster. Chris and I will kind of go back and forth with our thoughts. This is going to be a unique depth chart to put together because you have to weigh the coronavirus. You've got to weigh numbers for game day rosters, which have now grown to 46 to 48 players. You also have to take into account that you can bring up 2 guys from the practice squad every week. So there's a lot of maneuvering to go around. There's also the fact that injured reserve, if you make it past the cutdown deadline, you have unlimited spots where you can have guys come back after 3 weeks, which will be an asset for teams who are able to strategically use it to their advantage. So, Chris, let's start with the quarterback position, okay? That's your spot. I think we're both in agreement that it goes Carson Wentz, Nate Sudfeld, and Jalen Hurts. But from your perspective, after covering training camp, why do you think that's the right trio, the right order for that trio, and why do you think they're in a good spot or potentially a bad spot at the quarterback position?
Well, the reason why I think they're actually in a good spot right now when it comes to the mix of experience that they have in that position. I think Wentz, obviously, he's your starter. There's no doubt about that. I think the biggest thing that I was watching for see if Hurts would overtake Sudfeld to take over that number 2 spot, because Sudfeld is signed for 1 year, and then after this he's probably gone. But you want to see if maybe Hurts, who they spent a second round draft pick, would actually go ahead and overtake Sudfeld, because we've seen him in college when he's at Alabama and Oklahoma. We've seen what he can do athletically. Right now, Sudfeld definitely, I think, has the edge. And I think he proved that during Sunday's live scrimmage. Sudfeld, he seems poised in the pocket. He knows his system. He's been around there for a number of years now. So he knows this offense. He knows what Doug wants to see. He knows where the ends and breaks, where receiver spots are supposed to be. Hurts is getting there. No, don't get me wrong. Hurts has looked good in training camp at times. He's used his legs more. He's getting better at it, but it seems like he'll look at his first and second progression, and after that, he's just going to take off and use his legs for that one too. And you want to see a rookie truly go after his 3 or 4 options and then start to look before he uses his legs. And the one encouraging thing that I did see, especially on Sunday, was that he actually stepped up in the pocket and looked comfortable doing it. And what I mean by that is he was being a rush, instead of just taking off when a defender was coming at his face. He decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to say, cool, I'm going to let that tackle wash him down, go past him, step up in the pocket, and delivered a good 20-yard out to John Hightower. So I think there are some encouraging signs for that. But right now, say if in week 1 or week 2, Carson Wentz were to go down and you still have all these pieces around this offense, I'd feel more comfortable with Sudfeld. I think he's a good game manager with the potential, still has a good arm to throw deep. So right now, Sudfeld, I think, will remain the 2, and then Hurts will be a 3. I think the biggest question is going to be, how many times do we see Hurts dress on the 48 man? That's going to be the question. Maybe tip off, maybe the rumors of a package specifically for him. I think that's going to be the key thing to watch.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, we saw him really work his magic in the red zone. Obviously, he couldn't be hit because he was wearing a red jersey, but, from the Eagles' perspective, creating more opportunities on offense, especially with Jalen Reagor potentially out for 2 to 3 weeks of the season, it makes sense. You know what I mean? Like, that you can do some trick plays with Hurts. So I'm interested to see how they use him. So let's move over to running back. I think the debate here isn't who leads the group or who really fills out the snaps, but more so who's going to be are the Eagles going to keep 4 running backs, right? Like that's really the debate here. I know you're high on the 3 young guys, but to me, if I'm looking at the field and I'm looking at the depth chart with all the injuries at wide receiver, if I'm looking at the potential of Alshon Jeffrey being available by week 4, I'm not putting him on the PUP list. Stuff like that. And then I look at the injuries on the offensive line and all the question marks on the offensive line. I'm not really prioritizing running back because I've been extremely impressed by Boston Scott and Corey Clement throughout the summer. What's your take on that? Do you think they should keep 4 guys over maybe a 10th offensive lineman or a 7th wide receiver or what have you?
I actually had 5 going in prior to this week. I think I've more and more look at it and I was trying to shift around. I actually had 5, Killins being one of the 5 guys because of his return ability. But like you mentioned, when it came to those injuries, it really started to impact looking at. I still have 4. The reason why I have Sanders, Scott, Holyfield, I think he's going to be good when it comes to his coverage, his kickoff coverage. I've seen him going down there and punt return coverage. I think he could be an asset in that one. And Clement. And the reason why I definitely think Clement now has a bigger role than what he did beforehand, he has the ability, he's done it before being a kickoff return specialist. And I think right now, when you look at him and Ward, you're going to need those two guys to go ahead and fill that role at this point. So I think, and Holyfield can actually, I think, and Clement can actually help when it comes to offense, running third one, fourth and one, stuff like that. So I think those guys, that's where it stands right now with this running back situation.
So I'm going to go with three. Like, I feel very good about the three guys that are there. I also think there are better running backs that are not on the current Eagles roster that they could look at on the waiver wire. We just saw Leonard Fournette sign with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Maybe somebody drops off that roster. Keyshawn Vaughn, who I was a big fan of as a prospect, he could be the odd man out, and he was just selected in the third round by the Buccaneers. So, it's important to watch the waiver wire. I also think when you look at Elijah Holyfield, they could definitely get him through waivers, and I think he could be one of those guys that they bring up from the practice squad. So that's kind of like where I'm coming from. Like, I think in a normal year, you'd keep 4 running backs, but to me right now, I guess the one argument against that is, you don't know what Miles is going to be able to do coming off of missing basically 3 weeks of practice. So, I either way, I wouldn't kill them for keeping 4. I wouldn't pat myself on the back if they kept 3. I think like right now it'd be ideal if you could cut a guy in half and make him 3.5. You know what I mean? But the over under is 3.5, right? So we move on to tight end. I think they're definitely keeping 3. I think they learned from the debacle that was week 2 against Atlanta, where Dallas Goedert got injured pregame and all they could do was use Zach Ertz. Goddard's dealing with a thumb injury, so you don't know how much he can really contribute on an every down basis. And the third guy to me, and has been the entire offseason, is undrafted rookie Noah Tongai, who I think has a lot of athleticism. I think he's a guy that if in the future they decided to move on from Ertz, maybe he's the guy who fills Ertz's role opposite Goddard. If they move on from Goddard, he's a guy who can develop into a nice little well-rounded tight end. He's a guy who's been making plays out there. Do you have anything to add on that?
I think Tongai, if he can learn how to line up out wide, and you get down around the goal line and you wanted to go ahead and just try one to throw him up there, I think he can use that athletic ability, that big size he has, being 6'4", 247, going up against a defensive back. I think that would be a good thing for him. And I know this, I feel really bad for Josh Perkins because I was actually looking forward to when he went to 13 personnel. I really think down around the goal line, when you have 3 tight ends who have the ability to catch the ball the way those 3 would have been able to, it would have been sick. Not to say that Tongai can't do that, but just to create that many matchup problems. And then on the other side, have Jeffrey when he comes back, or JJ Arcega-Whiteside. It just presents so many problems. And it's disappointing to see that Perkins is out hurt.
Yeah, I mean, to me, Perkins was actually having a pretty good camp before he got hurt. Last year, he dropped pretty much everything in sight, and I was shocked he even was on the practice squad. But, now he's on injured reserve. His season's over. He needed surgery, I believe. So, he's a guy that, they'll move on without and figure it out from there. So, we move on to the wide receiver position, which to me is very intriguing. So I think, I don't want to speak for both of us, but I think we have all 3 rookies making it. So that'd be Jalen Reagor, Quez Watkins, and John Hightower, Desean Jackson, JJ Arcega-Whiteside, and Greg Ward. So that's 6 guys right there. Were we in agreement on that?
It definitely is.
Okay. So then it comes down to, do they keep 7 guys active? Now, there are 2 options there. Do they think Alshon Jeffrey can contribute by week 3, week 4, week 5, and they don't want to keep him on PUP and then maybe miss out on his play action ability or his playmaking ability for a couple more weeks than they could have? Or do they keep Jeffrey on PUP and bring in Deontay Burnett, who has clearly earned it on the field? It's just kind of a matter of the numbers game. And so to me, I think just based on reading the tea leaves, this is just an assumption. I don't think Alshon Jeffrey's starting the season on the PUP list. I think that he is trending in the right direction. I think they've dropped enough clues that it does kind of seem like maybe he could be ready by week 4, week 5. And when you look at Reagor's injury, and then you look at kind of the inexperience of Hightower and Quez Watkins, do you really want to put yourself in this position where you've got Greg Ward, who's inexperienced, you've got 3 rookies who are inexperienced. J.J. Arcega-Whiteside had one of the worst rookie seasons a wide receiver's had in Philly in a very long time, and that's a pretty low bar to begin with. And then you have Desean Jackson, who is an injury risk. So, like, do you put that out there and put that all on kind of Deontay Burnett filling out the depth chart, as opposed to maybe having the opportunity, like in 2018, to bring Alshon off the PUP list and have him or have him contribute before this 6-week stretch? Now, some of you might ask, what if they just put him on IR after putting him on the main roster? They cannot do that. Once he's been on the PUP list, he is not eligible for injured reserve. The only way he can go to injured reserve is if he's not taken off the PUP list after they've given him time to they've given, you get like there's like a exemption period where you can practice. If they don't activate him after that exemption time period's over, then he goes to IR. But they can't be slick with it. I thought I was really smart in coming up with that idea. I reached out to a couple of executives. They both turned me down on that one. So where do you stand on kind of like that 7th wide receiver? Do they keep a 7th wide receiver? Do they keep Jeffrey off? Do they take Jeffrey off PUP? Do they keep Burnett? Where are you at?
I think I'd rather go ahead, especially when I'd rather play it safe and keep him on PUP. The reason being is I'd rather have him healthy, knowing that he's ready to go for the back end of that schedule when you're playing more NFC foes, when you're playing possibly for playoff position, and when conference tiebreakers are going to come down to it. I think I probably would rest him a little bit more. And even when he comes back, it's going to be a tough decision. I think when it comes to 7th, and when it comes to the 7th, even if Burnett is brought up for a little bit, I think when it comes back to those 6 that we both agreed on, do you keep John Hightower or Quez Watkins? I mean, right now, that's a really tough decision. I mean, Hightower's been making circus catches left and right, but then you have the speed of Watkins as well too, and he's a really intriguing matchup. And when you look at this list right now, even when you have Reagor or Desean Jackson, like we mentioned, when it comes to Jackson's injuries history, you're going to need another speed guy to go ahead and alleviate some of that pressure from the safeties that may want to try to come up in the box, to go ahead if you have a lot of these slower receivers. Like, not saying that Jeffrey is a burner at all. I'm not saying Arcega-Whiteside is a burner, because they aren't, but they're more possession receivers. So you don't want to go ahead and box yourself in, so to speak, when it comes to that. So I think I would probably keep Jeffrey as of right now. I would keep him on PUP to ensure that he's healthy, so that way he's not going to re-aggravate anything or make anything worse, and then roll with what you have right now, because I still think you have enough weapons in other areas that can compensate for his absence. Then that way, when it's later in the season, you have a healthy Jeffrey going against the teams like the Seahawks, the Packers, the Saints, the Cardinals, the Cowboys, and Washington to end it. That's a tough ending right there possibly to go with, and I want to make sure that I have Jeffrey knowing that he's healthy going into that.
Yeah, I think that's completely valid. I mean, I don't think that's what they'll do, just because of past history, but I agree. I don't think that's I think you could make a very strong argument for that case, and you did. I think, the last thing you want to do is put somebody like Jeffrey in a situation where he can get injured again. He's been injured basically every year. We always make a big deal out of Carson Wentz's, injury history, but Alshon Jeffrey's missed a ton of games due to injury. So over the last 3 years, so it's interesting to see kind of where he's headed. The team seems to think that he is part of the game plan. Part of me wonders if they take him off PUP just to shop him and maybe trade him. They're, saying all the right things. But so we move on to the offensive line, and the offensive line is almost as intriguing as the wide receiver position, but not in the fun way that the wide receiver position is kind of set up. Like, the young wide receivers have all stepped up and kind of exceeded expectations. On the offensive line, you've got 2 major injuries in Andre Dillard and Brandon Brooks. And then you've got, you've got the situation with Jason Peters where he apparently wants to be paid more to play left tackle. We talked about it a lot in our last podcast. If he stays at right guard, Matt Pryor is not the answer at left tackle. He showed that in the scrimmage. I don't think he is really capable of being a long-term left tackle. Jordan Mailata certainly isn't the answer there. But I think both those guys will obviously be on the team. I do wonder if they shop around for a potential left tackle, or if just cooler heads prevail, the Eagles just guarantee Jason Peters incentives up to $6 million, and then he moves over to the left. You've got Matt Pryor at right guard. That's the ideal situation. You also have Lane Johnson, who's dealing with a lower body injury that they say is day-to-day, but he's missed 9 practices. So that's a little concerning too. Could you enter week 1 potentially with Matt Pryor at right tackle, Jason Peters moving back to left tackle, and Nate Herbig at right guard? Not necessarily an ideal situation for the Eagles, but I think I speak for both of us with the 9 guys that I think will definitely make the roster. So that's Pryor, Peters, Kelsey, Sayamalu, Lane Johnson, Jack Driscoll, Prince Tega Nate Herbig, and Jordan Mailata, correct?
I actually had one more. I had Jariga.
No. I know. I want to talk about that.
Yeah.
So you have them keeping 6 wide receivers, correct?
Yep.
Okay, I have them keeping 7. So you're going to use that extra spot. Well, I guess you use that extra spot for running back. But so I assume then that you, with three quarterbacks, 4 running backs, that's 7, plus 3 tight ends is 10, plus 6 wide receivers is 16. And then you're going to keep 10 offensive linemen. So you're gonna give an extra spot to the offense as opposed to the defense.
Come on, I'm an offensive guy.
So who? Yeah, and I'm a defensive guy. Don't read into that too much. But so who's your 10th guy that you got?
I have Jariga. I really do.
Yeah, I like that.
I think when you look at he's playing center right now, and I think is older. And if we've seen so far this training camp, when it comes to offensive line and you got a lot of these older guys, you never know what's going to happen. I think also that he needs to build that experience. I think he may be somebody to look out for to be in a possible center in the future if it works out, if Kelsey were to move on or retire, what have you, because he's floated that a couple times. But I think with the size he has, I think I've seen him so far, I've seen him on a couple quick screen passes. He definitely has some ability to get out there in the flats, which is something that this team values, especially as much as they run the screen pass. So I think when you look at what Jariga brings in the middle of that offense, I think, and the injuries that you've had already along those lines, and the potential that you may have to start mixing and matching some stuff if something were to happen, I think of all years, I think you have to have that extra spot on the offensive line just in case with everything that's going on, especially with this whole left tackle situation. You may have to start moving stuff around eventually. It's crazy just what's happening on that offensive line.
Well, and to your defense on using that extra spot for an offensive lineman, Jariga does profile as like a bigger Jason Kelsey. They're similar athletes, only Jariga's a lot bigger. I think.
Hey, sleepyhead. Why so sleepy? Oh, it's because your mattress is a bag of potatoes and scrap metal. You should try a Nectar mattress. With award-winning layers of comfort, you can sleep easy knowing you got incredible value. Mattresses start at just $499, and you get hundreds of dollars in accessories thrown in, as well as a 365-night home trial and a forever warranty. Go to nectarsleep.com.
What's going to be interesting is what they do in the waiver wire from an offensive line standpoint. Like this group does not have a lot of experience. Behind the starting line, you have a combined 3 snaps of regular season experience. 2 guys are rookies. If you keep Jariga, that's 3. And then Herbig's played 3 snaps during his rookie season. So, and Mailata's obviously never played a meaningful game in his career. So this is a group that needs experience. I would not be shocked if offensive line is a direct target for them on the waiver wire, which could inevitably cost Jariga or Mailata or maybe even Prince Tega a roster spot long term or short term. We also have to consider this, that when you're elevating 2 guys from the practice squad, you also have those extra 2 spots now on game day, but one of them has to be an offensive lineman. So teams are going to have 3 active offensive linemen at least on game days, which is good, especially when you consider Jason Peters' potential injury history, Matt Pryor maybe not working out at left tackle. They'll have a few more options on game day than they would in previous years. So let's move over in the trenches to the defensive line. Right now, I have the guys that making it are, I've got 10 guys. So I have Brandon Graham, Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave, Derek Barnett, Josh Sweat, Malik Jackson, Hassan Ridgeway, Vinny Curry, Casey Toohill, and Joe Osman. Those are my 10 guys. I have concerns because, as we mentioned earlier, Avery, Barnett, and Curry all have injuries. You need to be able to fill up that group. That's why I think you'll see Osman and Toohill be those guys. I think they've both outplayed Sharif Miller. Where do you stand on the defensive line?
I think I agree with you that I think Osman has outplayed Sharif Miller, but I have Miller making the roster. Only reason why I would say that, if I'm a general manager and I have to cut my 4th round draft pick that I made last year already compared to an undrafted free agent. Now I know they're going to say they want the best team they possibly could have on the roster, but I think especially given the capital they used as a 4th round draft pick on Miller, I think they'll give him one more year and try to sneak Osman onto the practice squad. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think Osman has done a really good job this training camp. Him and Toohill, I think, on coming off that edge, I think have looked very, very well, especially for being low round 7th round draft pick and an undrafted free agent. But I think right now, if just looking what they had to use in order to go ahead and get Miller as a 4th round pick, I think they're going to go ahead and just give it one more year, because it'll be hard to justify a second year, 2 years into it, you go ahead and have to cut your 4th round draft pick. That's why I have Miller on the roster right now.
So my retort to that is, I think, okay, so he played 1 game last year. He never played on defense. He's only played in the preseason. He doesn't have any real negative tape out there. If you liked him as a 4th round pick, maybe other teams liked him as a 6th or a 5th or a 6th round pick, I'd shop him. I don't really think he's a great fit for the wide 9. I don't think he's the type of athlete that just can pin his ears back and go. I think he's more of a 3-4 defensive end, the way he's built, the way his athleticism his hips kind of align. I would call Joe Douglas, because Joe Douglas clearly had some input on that draft, and they need some help up front with the Jets. That's what I would do if I were Howie Roseman. Everyone thought that they overdrafted him in the 4th round. They probably could have gotten him in the 5th. I don't think he's looked particularly good during training camp. Honestly, I barely noticed him, which is kind of a bad thing when you're in the 2nd year and you're a 4th round pick and like it's a make or break summer for you. So that's my argument. Then we look at linebacker, and I think we're in agreement that they're going to keep 5 guys, correct?
Yep. I have the 5. That's why I have.
So you're looking at Nate Gary, who's going to play the majority of the snaps. You've got TJ Edwards, who's been rotating with Duke Riley, who will also make the team, who will also probably be the special teams captain. And then you've got the 2 rookies, Sean Bradley, the 6th round pick, and Davian Taylor, the 3rd round pick. The concern I have is if you suffer an injury, especially with Nate Gary or TJ Edwards, you're going to have to play one of the 2 rookies who, in my opinion, while Sean Bradley has played well during training camp, I don't think that's a realistically positive option. Davian Taylor is not ready. He's essentially the Jordan Mailata of the defense, is how I've kind of put it. Where are you at with that?
And you're right, which is another thing that's concerning, especially you use a 3rd round pick. It's your 3rd round pick right there on Taylor. But
we knew he was going to be a project. We knew.
Yeah, definitely did. But I think right now, especially with how much they planned on playing nickel and dime defenses, and especially with the athleticism that you have, even with an injury, I think you can even really roll with 4. I think even in an injury, and being that guy, I feel comfortable enough with Gary And I feel comfortable with Riley. The way he's performed so far in training camp, I think he may surprise some people. I mean, he's been able to go ahead. He's a rangy guy. He's got the speed. He's got that motor. I know it's one of those overused words where he's got a great motor, but it was actually made, I think, for guys like him. He continually goes ahead. He's diagnosing the play a lot better as well too. So I feel comfortable with Riley as well too. Edwards, he is what he is. He's a decent guy, but I think he is what he is for that one. And Bradley right now, I think he's making strides. But like as we heard Jim Schwartz, has said in the past
R.I.P.
that he was a great one. But as we heard what Jim Schwartz has said in the past, linebacker is one of the toughest positions to learn in his defense, and no matter if it's Bradley or Taylor, which I would probably put Bradley ahead of him Taylor right now, it's going to be a tough go to go ahead and fill in right now. I mean, he's only learned the one linebacking position right now, but he's going to have to learn all three if they actually go to a true 4-3. So it's going to be a really tough around here, but I think they actually get by probably with 4 linebackers at this point.
I think that's another spot on the waiver wire that they'll kind of look at. I think Alex Singleton has played pretty well on defense and special teams. I think he'll get through to the practice squad. I don't think they have to worry about him being claimed on waivers. He could be a guy that they elevate, during the regular season, like they did last year. They kept 6 linebackers throughout the last 2 weeks, so they clearly knew they were going to keep lower numbers. Your guy, Dante Olson, really didn't have a shot. But we move on to the secondary, where I think they keep 10 defensive backs. You probably think there's going to be 9, right? Just because of the way your numbers. Okay. So my logic here is we brought up. I forgot to bring up Will Parks earlier on the show. But Will Parks will be out for 4 to 6 weeks, reportedly, with a hamstring injury. That's not good, because when we talked about the linebacker group and you bring up the lower numbers, he's going to play that big nickel role. He's going to play what they call quarter in dime packages, where as opposed to having 4 corners, the Eagles will use 3 corners and 3 safeties. And, we talk about filling Malcolm Jenkins' shoes. Jalen Mills and Will Parks are really splitting that job. Will Parks is going to play more of the linebacker-ish role that Jenkins played. Mills is going to play more of a traditional strong safety. So with Parks out of the lineup, you've got low numbers at safety to begin with. Kayvon Wallace is going to have to step up. Honestly, he wasn't that noticeable during camp. He had 1 pick off Jalen Hurts, but really, you haven't really noticed him a ton this summer. That doesn't mean he can't play there, but it'll be interesting to see how much, big safety they use, how much linebacker groupings they use, if they use more 2 nickel linebackers as opposed to using 3 safeties and nickel defense, what have you. So with that said, I definitely think they keep 10 defensive backs, but I think that means keeping 5 safeties and 5 cornerbacks. So the cornerbacks that I have are Darius Slay, Avonte Maddox, Nikel Roby-Coleman, Crayvon LeBlanc, and Rasul Douglas. The safeties I have are Jalen Mills, Rodney McLeod, Kayvon Wallace, Will Parks, and Grayland Arnold. I think Grayland Arnold is probably the 53rd player on the roster if they don't keep a 10th offensive lineman. I haven't noticed him a ton. I've seen him make some pretty nice plays in the run game. The reason why I'm keeping him is he's extremely versatile. He can play corner, he can play nickel, he can play safety. That's an advantage for them. That's why I'm keeping him over somebody like, say, Marcus Epps or Rudy Ford. And I think with Will Parks out of action, what'll happen is after the initial cut down, they'll place Parks on IR and then bring back either somebody like Marcus Epps or Rudy Ford, who they could probably get through waivers. Grayland Arnold had kind of a big name for an undrafted free agent, and I think he's a guy that maybe they want to protect long-term. Howie Roseman immediately gave him praise right after they signed him. That's not very typical for an undrafted free agent. So clearly he's a guy that they might want to invest in. I didn't think he had a bad camp. It just wasn't as spectacular as you may think. So that's where I'm at. So who are your 9 guys in the secondary?
You said all 9 of them. I liked it too. At corner, I have Slay and Maddox. I have Nikel Roby-Coleman, and I also have Rasul Douglas. I think that he makes it. And notice that one name we did not say combined with either one. Sidney Jones.
LeBlanc. Oh. Do you have LeBlanc too?
Nope, I don't have that. He was the extra guy I was thinking about. I have him going. I don't have. I think with Grayland Arnold, I think he goes ahead, like you said, with his versatility, with a safety and cornerback. And I think that's going to be key, especially in this positionless defense that the defensive backfield that they want to have. I think somebody like Arnold, I think, will definitely be able to fill both roles. And as the more and more experience he has, I think he's going to be adequate in that position. That's
so.
why.
So to be clear, sorry, not to cut you off, but so to be clear, we have the same grouping minus Kayvon LeBlanc for you, correct?
Exactly. Correct.
Okay, and so let's get back into Sidney Jones, right? From my perspective, he's the guy with the most tradable name on the roster. I don't know if you can get anything for him, but I would assume you could get a conditional pick for him. He's going to be a restricted free agent after this year, due to being on the PUP list as a rookie. So there's that added incentive there where maybe you have 2 years with him, and you can give him an original round tender and not have to pay the second round price. So from a restricted standpoint, so I do think there's appeal there. If they can get a 7th round pick for him as opposed to cutting him, I think they feel good about it. I think if they can't trade him, they're not going to cut him. Rasul Douglas, I'd be shopping too. I don't think he necessarily fits the positionless secondary. If I can get value for one of those guys, I feel good. And Howie's typically pretty good about that. Carolina has been looking for secondary help. I wonder if they'd be willing to trade somebody like Dennis Daly, who was a 6th round pick last year, but started 8 games at left tackle, maybe give you some experience to be a swing tackle for Sidney Jones. But where are you at with him? Would you cut him outright?
I would first try to shop him with a team that's about ready to cut somebody else. And I'm just trying to look at everybody out there, and and that's the tough part, trying to see who's going to be out there available on that same Saturday. I'd go ahead, if I'm Howie right now, I'm probably on the phone right before cut down day and seeing like, hey, I wouldn't flat out tell him, hey, we're about to cut him, but just to go ahead and say, hey, you know what do you think about Sidney Jones? And if somebody else has a player they think they're about to release and they want to guarantee and not have to go through that waiver fight, I'm talking to that team right now, trying to see if I can get something from him. Because I think with his injury history, and I think a lot of people know what Jones's situation here is in Philadelphia. Like you said, you'll be lucky to get a third day pick for him, a late third day pick for him. But I think especially if you want to dangle that out there, especially for a team who really, really wants him to try it out, see if a change of scenery is going to be good, I'd go ahead and call the Eagles right now. Or if I'm the Eagles, I'm calling somebody else and see if they have maybe a more veteran offensive lineman. Maybe they're looking for somebody else, and like you said, like a linebacker too, to go ahead and just make that trade outright that way. Because I think it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough to justify keeping him on that roster, and if they can fill another need by putting him out there available, I definitely see if it's possible.
Yeah, and to me, I don't want a draft pick for Sidney Jones, and here's my logic on that. I would take it for somebody like Anthony Rush or for Rasul Douglas, but the issue here is they need help now. And, their playoff window might be shrinking, especially when you consider their cap space issues next year. They'll be fine. It's Howie Roseman and Jake Rosenberg. Like, they know what they're doing, but they still might not be players in free agency next year. So if you can trade for a guy who's in the 3rd year of his rookie deal and you have him for another year on the cheap, like, you feel good about that. Like, I think bringing in another draft pick who you could potentially cut, especially if they're a 7th round pick, like, we didn't know Casey Toohill was going to make the team until he greatly exceeded the expectations of the writers and probably the team, really. They probably looked at him as a long-term project, but he was killing it the last 2 weeks. So that's where I kind of stand. So closing out, let's talk about 3 guys that we didn't have on the depth chart that we think are kind of like squarely on the bubble and you wouldn't be surprised to see make the roster. So I'll give you time to think about that. I'm going to give you my 3. Craig James. He's a guy who I think has had a decent camp. He's played all 3 cornerback spots. He's a special teams ace. I would not be shocked if they can trade Sidney Jones if they outright cut Rasul Douglas for Craig James. That would not shock me. I know Dave Phipp likes him. I know he's liked by Jim Schwartz. The coaching staff has never really shown a lot of affection for Rasul Douglas, so I think maybe it'd be time for him to kind of move on. He's also on a much smaller deal than he initially had. He restructured it as we reported it earlier this summer. Another guy who I think has a shot is Sua Opeta. I think he's gotten some really good reps at left guard. They really liked him last year as an undrafted free agent. He had kind of a buzzworthy name. I would not be shocked to see him claimed off waivers if they do indeed cut him. And then I guess my third guy would probably be Elijah Riley, who I think has low-key had a pretty good camp. I don't think he's going to make the roster, but if they can get him through waivers, I think he's a great story. I think he's a guy that could long-term develop into a contributor on special teams, and maybe he's one of those kind of tweener guys. He's got a body type that I could see transitioning well actually to linebacker with the way they like things. So he's an undrafted free agent that kind of caught my eye. Who are three guys that you think probably won't make the roster, but maybe either should or they've done enough where you think if they can get them to waivers, you feel get them through waivers and on the practice squad, you feel pretty good about their chances of maybe seeing some playing time this year or beyond?
I think I spoke a little bit earlier when it came to Killins. I really think that the fact that Doug Peterson took a significant time during his press conference to talk about his versatility and what he could bring to this team when it comes to at the running back position and at the wide receiver position, him learning to go ahead and work the slot area. I think he's somebody who I really truly believe if they somehow threw a fifth guy on there or kept him as there or snuck him on the roster somehow, I think he's a guy I wouldn't be surprised when it came to that. Another guy, you say Sua Opeta, I'll raise you that and say Julian Good Jones. I think I've spent a lot of time looking at this offensive line, especially with the injuries that's happened around there. And this guy, he's a road grader when it comes to the run blocking. He does a really good job. He has a good base. He's active with his hands. He's able to push guys out the middle. When I looked at him, I thought he did a great job. And his pass blocking has steadily improved over time throughout camp. So if he made the roster, I wouldn't be surprised at all. And the other one was Joe Osman. I mean, and this could be a product of what that offensive line currently is right now. Osman, one thing I really like when it comes to him is in the wide nine is if you can two things. One, if you have that so-called bend to get around the left or right tackle, and when you do that rush, I think he has that. But also one thing I really like that he does, he gets under the offensive lineman's pads. And he did that with as a thing when he did a bull rush as well too. He has the ability to duck under the arms of those the tackles trying to reach out to pass block and go ahead and basically control them, either pushing them back or setting them up to go inside to go for another rush as well too. I think he has a good ability to go ahead and make this roster. So if any of those three players found a way to make it, I would not be surprised one bit. I really would.
And then let's talk about like the two guys, we don't want to pile on here, but who are the two guys that you kind of came into camp that you thought were going to be something and kind of weren't? My two guys would be Mike Warren, who got a ton of buzz in the draft community, but looked like he was running with like 3-ton boulders in his shoes. It was kind of disappointing. It was very clear that Holyfield and Killins were ahead of him during camp, which was unfortunate because I think he is a guy who's got a pretty good pedigree. Maybe he makes the practice squad and eventually gets some playing time. Look, people weren't high on Boston Scott when he came here. So, maybe there's something that kind of happens down the road. I actually saw Boston Scott coach him up quite a bit. And then the other guy is Anthony Rush, who I brought up, I think, earlier. Had a pretty decent rookie year as a rotational run stopper. I just didn't notice him at all this offseason. So those would be my two guys. Who are yours?
I mean, Warren, I wholeheartedly agree with you, Warren. I mean, watching him when he was at Cincinnati, being part of the Luke Fickell offense, and then also I believe it was Tommy Tuberville before then. When you saw him running, he ran angry. He ran with power. And he was a tough to bring down when it came to AAC defenses and everybody else. He was tough to bring down. And I looked about it. I will say his hands were a lot better, but he he catches the ball a little awkward for me too. Like he catches the ball a little awkward, and he's not running with that same power. Granted, it's a big step up from the AAC to the NFL, but when you look at when he's running with that power, he's not finishing the runs. He's not punishing the tacklers when he's trying to go ahead and make them to do that. I thought he was going to be the guy who was going to be your short down back to go ahead and do that, but I expected more. The other guy is Kayvon Wallace. I mean, I know he's a rookie. He's going to stick around for a while, but I really thought he came from that Clemson safety tree of, hey, you know what? I mean, Brian Dawkins talked him up. I thought we're going to see around to see this guy who was going to be flying around the field, basically making us question, should he be in a starting lineup or should he see significant time in the big nickel or something else like that? And right now, and Schwartz said this also too, safety's the other one that's tough to learn. So I wonder, he's a rookie. I won't get hammer him too much or anything like that, but I thought he was one guy I was really high on seeing how he would fit into this defense. And it just hasn't, haven't seen it so far when it comes to him.
Well, it's been quite a long podcast. We've gotten a lot of information in your face. Make sure you sign up for Eagles Extra. You'll get all the information on who's getting cut as it happens, or possibly before. We'll give you some exclusive analysis. Just sign up for Eagles Extra. It's in all of our articles in the link. It'll be linked into this podcast post as well. Also, make sure you're following us on Twitter. We'll have a plethora of information there. Look, it's going to be an interesting cut down weekend. We'll probably have an extra podcast next week to break down all the cuts. You know, for Chris, I'm Mike. Thanks for joining us on the No Huddle Show podcast.